Hello, and welcome to Khyber Shards, a 5th edition actual play show set in the Eberron campaign world. This being Friday, it is time for our weekly Khyber Shards Answers, and this week we are joined by R.A., the player of Esri.
Hello.
Huzzah.
I don't have
This
anything to
week...
break.
This week we had kind of a split story with Pog and Shade heading off to talk to giants, and Esri coming back to talk to Thora. So I'm curious. Esri was very much a leader in arranging how are we going to try and find out what's going on with Thora and Dane without directly asking, hey, what's going on with Thora and Dane? I want to know, now that it's happened, how do you think that went? Do you think the characters learned what they needed to learn?
We certainly didn't. We did not get the information we were hoping to. I think we have a good idea of what's going on between Thor and Dane. I think the bit about do they even know how they got here, we did not end up clarifying that.
Right.
Which I think we only would have probably if Pog had gotten it out of Dane. Because I didn't see an opportunity for that with Thor, really. So really the idea with talking to Thora was to correlate stories and see if, what Dane was saying was what she was saying. And it seemed like in terms of what they intend to do and how they disagree, it seemed to be pretty in line. So in that sense, yes. But yeah, no, we didn't get the juicy lore that we were looking for.
That is true. I was wondering whether you would. It's hard to ask that without revealing that you overheard a conversation, but yes, did not quite get the juicy secret.
And that was part of it, from Esri's point of view, is like we still heard that, or Shade heard it, so we still know that there's an unanswered question. So we haven't lost. We haven't tipped that hand, and so we may still be able to hear or interpolate different bits of information and see like what might have been meant by that. And the reason he didn't want to just come out and say it is because, okay, now if Thora knows we overheard that, she's gonna potentially, it may not mean anything, we don't know, but potentially she would put her guard up even further on that. So that's the possibility is still out there. It just didn't happen yet.
Yeah, you haven't had to play the card. That's fair. Very cool. I'm curious, just because it's next week's episode will continue that. But you often, due to your Monday night thing, are not at the beginning of watch parties. Have you been watching the Ari stuff at the beginning of them?
Yes, I've seen all the Ari stuff released so far.
Okay, I was curious because some of the questions, or at least one of the questions, relates to that.
I'm sorry. Drop it. Yes.
Yeah, dog. I gotcha. Mine's currently cooperating, so we'll see. Right until somebody in the neighborhood closes a door.
Yeah.
So speaking of Ari stuff, Laura asks, what was the blue person in the Feywild a reference to? So as some people have started to pick up, pretty much everything in this little Feywild jaunt is some kind of little reference to pop culture or literature or that sort of thing, because it's the realm of stories. In terms of Ponderous, Ponderous was a furbolg in his description, but as far as his reference and particularly his hat, his personality and the hat were references to the character of Puddleglum in The Silver Chair in the Chronicles of Narnia, who was also an eel fisherman. So that's that's where Ponderous came from. So there's that. Laura also asks,
Did you also
how
drop
many-
a Silverchair reference? There's
Only
a
in
band
the
called
sense-
Silverchair.
Oh, Silverchair is a band? I didn't know there was a band called Silverchair.
So we gotta
no, I did
update you
not-
on your 90s grunge.
Yeah, I did not manage to double the reference there.
Mm.
That would have been
Oh, well.
that would have been extremely solid, though, to be able to work a lyric from a band with that name into a character who's drawn from a book of that name. That's good. Alas, no. No,
okay. No one has still caught all the Linkin Park episodes I made references I made in that one episode.
Yeah, that's fair. My 90s grunge was fairly limited. Laura also would like to know, how many Funko Pops does RA have?
5, 7. You've seen almost all of them. I think there might be a couple I failed to show, but you have seen almost all of them. They're all up there now.
Nice.
I don't know. I don't have a full count. I think there's 30 something. It's actually I ran out of space years ago, and so I haven't really kept up the collection. I used to have them at work. And so it'd be what I, put around my work desk. And that's still true, but I work from right here now, and so I ran out of room at home to stack them up. So the collection
has to expand those shelves like all the way.
Well, actually, yes, there are shelves in front of me as well, but they just also got stuff.
What, you store things other than nerdy knickknacks on your shelf?
That is the problem.
How absurd.
I have a plan to potentially print out some like staired risers for them. So like they're 2 or 3 deep on the shelf there, but you can't really tell. And so if I give them risers, I can show them off better and probably get a few more up there.
There you go.
I intended when they first came out, and this was a while ago. Sorry, my contact is not being nice. I refused to buy them when they first came out because I knew as soon as I saw them that it would be a problem if I ever started. But I expressed interest, and so my mother bought me a couple for Christmas one year. And once you have 2, you got a collection now. So
yeah. Do you have a theme that you collected on? Like, did you collect specific series, or was it just anytime you saw one you thought was cool?
I've got Marvel up here. The groups, the 4 main groups are Game of Thrones, Star Wars, Walking Dead, and Marvel.
Okay.
That's
and then
I've got.
Do they have an Avatar?
I've got a
collection?
couple.
I would have expected you to have like an Avatar collection of them.
Yeah, I don't know if they do. I just ran out of.
Yeah.
I've got a couple Firefly. I've got a couple Harry Potter, but there's plenty I would collect.
Then Laura would also like to know. I don't know if this has an answer, but Laura would also like to know, what's Esri's dream date, and has Esri ever been on a date?
Oh, yeah. I mean, even if those have answers, it hasn't really come up in the show, so I'm gonna leave that unanswered here in case if it never comes up in the show, whenever we wrap this thing up, we can revisit that and talk about it. But yeah,
okay,
we'll wait to see if that comes up.
That's fair. We had a question from Nap, which sounds really nice right now. What are the biggest differences between your Eberron and Eric's Eberron? Do you guys have any particular lore bits that you disagree on or like to change from each other? Anything that you like that might be Keith Baker canon, but isn't Wizards of the Coast canon, or anything that you don't like about the Keith Baker canon, but you do like about the Wizards of the Coast canon. Okay, so there's a lot there.
Well, my Eberron is very
right.
narrow because my look.
The second half of that question regarding the Keith Baker canon and the Wizards of the Coast canon, there's an Eberron book from 3rd edition called Forge of War that details the events of the last war, that is mostly universally reviled by the Eberron community, and I kind of like it. I understand the objections to it and that it contradicts itself and other things, but as far as a handy lore book, I've drawn a lot of fun things out of that book, and I find it very useful. The problem for me to answer that question is I don't treat RPG really as having canon exactly. I look at all of the Eberron books and all of Keith Baker's blog posts and all of it as a whole bunch of stuff that I can grab from to assemble my Eberron. So my Eberron almost certainly looks very different from an Eberron that Keith Baker runs at his table. My Eberron probably looks different from the Eberron you run at your table. You know, anyone runs at their table. It's going to be very different because I'm not really very worried if I disagree with Keith Baker or with the official sources, and I would argue you shouldn't be either with anything, because you're making your own story. That's the fun of it. So, for example, our story has already begun to deal with the existence of House Tarkanan. Our creation of that house is based on entirely different circumstances from the official description of that house in the source books. There's some similarities. It's still, being founded by ex-spies and people who were in a secret program. It's just the nature of all of that is very, very, very different. So that's just an easy one right away. In terms of me and Eric, so interestingly, as much as me and Eric have played, we've co-run an Eberron game, and then I've run this and he's run Eberron Renewed. And that's really the extent of me and Eric running separate Eberron games that I've experienced. Probably the biggest thing that probably differs would be my representation of the Church of the Silver Flame compared to Eric's. I'm just trying to think of things that I've done that Eric has done that are different. My Church of the Silver Flame is very much the Jedi Order, with a little more religious terminology, and Eric's is a lot more medieval fantasy, Catholic-esque church kind of religion. So, and that's generally the way it's presented in a lot of the source books, which is fine. But I've tend to represent it a little bit different way in characters that I play and in games that I run. So that's probably the only inflection point I can think of. I mean, if any of the big world bad guys and plot points that Eric dealt with in Eberron Renewed come up in my show, I will deliberately treat them differently. Like if we're ever engaging with the quarry, then my quarry will be different from Eric's quarry. If we're ever engaging with the dragons of the chamber or any of these other things, I'll treat those things differently. If I have to play King Borinel, I'll play him differently. So I will try to differentiate in some cases, if I'm dealing with really, really big world plot points. But otherwise, I don't worry too much about it. And I don't mind if there's some overlap in the way that me and Eric represent things in our two Eberrons, even though they are very different kinds of Eberrons. So there would be similarities, there'll be differences.
So having never played at Eric's table, but I can speak to to this a little bit. I'm not I'm not exactly sure how much this impacts all of that, but you definitely allow the players to invent as well, quite a bit. And so I assume that changes how the official lore gets interpreted. You've
Oh yeah.
once we hook onto something and decide it's bad or good, or it can change the nature of a lot of things just to fit it into the flow better.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I like that it throws curveballs to me occasionally that I have to kind of just adapt how the story is playing out that way. So yes, that definitely does. Uh, Speaking of other people's tables, I'm Spartacus asks, RA, you have DM'd Philip and Shade and maybe even Eric, I think once,
Yeah,
briefly.
he guessed it
He
at one of our.
guested.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one session.
Uh, do you enjoy being his DM or his player more? Uh,
Mm. That's a very difficult question. Almost it can't be answered because
mhm.
they're different. They're just different things. Um, for the with a couple of exceptions where others from our group have run either short campaigns or one-offs or whatever. Philip is pretty much my only GM. I've yeah, I haven't really played too much with others. And also same sort of thing for the most part. The only game I've ever run, he has been a player. So I also don't have a lot of like big things to pull from. It's just we play RPGs together. It's just kind of from my point of view, that's how it is. So yeah, I don't know. Not obviously. It's obvious to you, but maybe not to everyone else. I'm a player a lot more often than I am
Mm.
um running the game. Uh I very much enjoy GMing, but uh I just don't end up doing it as much. Preparation is not a strong point for me. I like to invent at the table, and I do much better. I get really stuck. Like if I was trying to run an Eberron game, I would be really stuck trying to like find the lore and like trying not to trip over what has been established because it didn't come from my head. And so
Mm.
I do a lot better if like I know very broad strokes, and like if someone asks a question and I don't know it, I just make it up on the fly and then I integrate it. My brain remembers it better. So to some extent, jamming for me is very, very stressful because I don't have a great understanding of how to I should prepare or what I want to prepare, because I also really like toys, as you can see. And so I really want to have like the big cool set pieces and the elaborate battles, but anytime I try to do that stuff, I feel like it just doesn't come off as well as when I don't bother and I just try to make things cooler as we go. I,
Mhm.
for whatever reason, that seems to work better. So and it's much easier to do that as a player. Is kind of where I'm going with this, is that in terms of fun, it's much easier to show up as a player without doing a whole lot of preparation because I'm only responsible for the player. Uh, but yeah, that's a long way to say I like both, and
Yeah.
they're so totally different. It's so asymmetrical that I don't think I could choose one.
I would agree. It is hard to compare. Um, there are definitely times where it's like, I've been GMing for so long, I really want to play, and I'm real excited when I get to. But the same thing is true in the reverse. Like that when I've gone through places where I'm mostly just being a player, I will get kind of antsy. Of like, all right, I wanna run the world. Um, like it's both are
I
very
will
fun and
say
very different.
you mentioned you and Eric running like co-running a game, and I have thought of that a lot. That um, I would I would love, I think, to run a game with someone who's very good at like the preparation and world building stuff, where I can run the table, because I
Hmm.
feel like I have a strength at running the table, but like again, the like if there was a lore master next to me to say like this, this is the answer to that lore question that you don't know, and then I can handle the improv stuff. That would be That would be pretty cool to try sometime anyway.
That's
Um,
probably an arrangement one could
that's
create.
kind of a hard thing to.
But
What's that?
that's probably an arrangement one could
What?
work out.
Yeah, you just have to find someone who wants that, and I don't
Hmm.
know. It's not like the normal thing. I will say, like, even running from a book, I in the game, the sort of long running game that we have that I run intermittently. Uh, I started from a book because I did, it makes it easier to have the world sort of laid out for you. But I found it highly frustrating because it wasn't so laid out that all the answers were there, but it was laid out enough that like you had a structure you were trying to follow, and that was very frustrating. And so I find myself in this weird place of like I just want to build my own worlds, and then well, it'll take me forever to do.
I think one of the most stress-inducing but also really cool things that we as a table ever did at our group was um I don't remember what caused us to do this, but we ran I ran a game where I really only gave you guys like 5 or 6 facts about the world, and then every time someone did a check to know something, I had them answer the question after their roll. Is like they rolled, they succeeded, and then they had to tell me what it was, and so the world got created in play in a lot of ways. And
Was that the one that was
that
based
was
on
very fun
the
to,
shooter game
yeah, on the Destiny
loosely?
setting. Yeah, yeah, very
Okay.
loosely.
Sorry, I didn't know if you were trying to avoid mentioning the IP.
No, yeah, we based it on the Destiny world. It was just a very loose
Yeah,
setup of post apocalyptic, but
yeah. And some of us
um,
love that, and some of us don't.
yeah, but it was, and again, that was true. Also, some of the players really liked inventing lore on the spot,
Right.
and some of the players I think really did not like having to invent lore on the spot. So that's a little
As you might
tricky.
have noticed with Casey's reticence to invent names on the spot, she's one that likes to think about it a little more.
Yeah. I'm Spartacus also asks, also, how have you not pushed the Mark of Death plotline more? Is Esri learning anything from his story time or bust, either from the books or from the bust?
I got a question for you. I am Spartacus. Is
I'm
your
Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus. Is your name a reference to that thing you do? Curious. Um, how have I not pushed? It's mostly just because of the group decision to pursue the Feywild stuff first. That's mainly why. This the the current plot lines haven't really dealt with Esri's problems or backstory. So that's more just a table etiquette thing. I think we as a group decided that we were going to pursue the Feywild plot lines, and so trying to hijack that with the Mark of Death questions, it's not the time. So we'll get to that if we get to it when we get to it. Is he learning from the bust? Yes, it's sort of the same kind of thing that like we've set. Well, it's really more of a MacGuffin, right? I work to set up that okay, he and the bust have come to an arrangement. He
Mm-hmm.
gives he reads, and I'm sorry, it's give me the guy's name again.
Oh,
I'll know it as soon as I hear it.
Jaler Alarenti.
Alorente. Okay. So I get a couple of names from our other game that are
Mm.
also sort of in that um they sound similar. I get them mixed up
Mm-hmm.
a lot. Uh so Jaler is giving him information. And so I've kind of set it up so that when we need questions asked, we can actually have that and not have to like establish trust again or whatever. We establish that. It's just again, it hasn't really come up come come mm. it hasn't really come up yet in the storylines. It's not where
Mhm.
we are. Um, Also, there's only so much understanding at the moment. I don't think it's come up to Esri's notice that the mark of death is something that was known in recent history and was like eradicated.
Mhm.
And so he only knows the weirdness of, okay, it used to be this ancient thing that this person recognizes but no one else does. He doesn't know that like there's something much more recent and
Mhm.
urgent maybe to understand. So
Yeah.
until that point of fact comes up, he doesn't have the motivation to pursue it hard, other
Yeah.
than understanding it for his own purposes. Was that the whole question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, and that's partly my doing. That's partly on purpose and partly just the way it played out. Um, because Jalert predates that, and so Jalert doesn't have that particular information point of to give, involving the all the stuff with House Vol.
Yeah,
So
I
yes,
imagine it'll be at some point Esri will have to go to someone and say the words
yeah,
and see the eyes get big and confused, and maybe that will, trigger something. But I should say that the other part to that question, maybe if the intent is Esri learning anything from the history he's reading so far? No. And I made that explicit,
yeah,
um, and that he's saying words out loud, but there's there's so much of it he doesn't care about and doesn't understand that it's like, go read a math book that's
right,
too high level for you, and you'll get some of, you'll understand some of the words, but you're not going to retain how to do stuff. And it's like, yes, maybe the general gist of this period of history he might be getting, but like all these names and whatever is happening, it's just kind of forgetting as soon as he says it,
right, yeah. Uh,
because I don't
then
want him to
me,
have a history lore aspect.
that's fair.
All right,
Okay.
deal with that in a second.
Uh, we also have a
Okay.
question from YouTube comments on the most recent episode from Emily AW. Uh, and Emily asks for RA, aside from the obvious that you know what's up with the journal, even though Esri doesn't, is there a reason why Esri didn't ask Thora if she knew anything about their stalker?
Uh, Actually, to your point, no. It was mostly because we as players are, sort of aware of the situation. Uh, Obviously, I mean, I've really got to eliminate that from my vocabulary. We had to address it as players. It needed to come up. We needed to, find the journal, have our confusion, have our moments. At the same time, as players, we kind of know what's going on to an extent, and it just sort of becomes inconvenient to keep bringing it up,
Hmm.
because it doesn't add anything more. That we've covered it in the narrative. We don't really need to recover it. It clearly would make sense for Esri if they found this notebook and had no idea who this person being referenced was, and it was had all these intimate details about them. Esri would be all over it. His paranoia would just go crazy if we were playing it precisely as if, we had no idea that we we weren't metagaming it at all. But there would be no point narratively
Hmm.
to doing that. It wouldn't really go anywhere, and we'd just waste time hearing over and over from people like, "Oh, that's weird. I've never heard of this person." Right? There's no one who's heard of this person. There's not going to be an answer
Yeah.
for us to figure out on our own. So yeah, no, it's just more about being cognizant of uh you have to metagame to some extent. You have to understand what you're doing.
Yeah.
We the same reason we don't describe every meal we eat in exacting detail, or why you know, no one in these games really ever goes to the bathroom. It's like it, it doesn't add
Unless you're on
anything to the
Critical Role. There's
narrative.
a lot
Yeah,
of
well, yeah,
bathroom going on Critical Role.
there. I mean, look, if that's part of your game, it's part of your game. It's not really for us so much.
That is true. It's not much for us.
Leave it.
All right.
Oh, sorry.
Cool. Oh, that's all right. Mia asks, Mia says and then asks, Ezri is starting to reveal more of himself, which is surprising and wonderful. Is this planned, or is it something that is happening organically?
Well, it's organic because I mean, I don't recall anything in specific that she might be referring to. I'd be interested to know like what particular things she's talking about.
I would
Yeah.
guess it is we're getting a little more. It feels like in recent episodes we have gotten a little more genuine Esri response, and not just the Esri is keeping an even keel in Crisis.
Okay. So I mean, part of that is intentional in that he went through his crisis of action and came out on the other side deciding that even though he doesn't actually agree with much of it, that he has a role in this group, or he wants to remain in this group, which means he needs a role in this group that isn't just trying to be contrary. And so, you know, he has he has resigned himself, or assigned himself perhaps in some ways to, and I don't mean this, I'm going to say something that sounds maybe a little offensive, or I don't necessarily mean it that way, but he's decided to do the thinking in the group, to be the one who, because the rest are going to rush in, they're going to, he's gonna take his natural inclination to not rush in and try to turn that to something that's gonna help the group. It's a natural
Yeah.
fit. He's become the healer of the group, although, you know, being a a particular kind of, having particular druidic talents means that he's not like a super healer necessarily, but uh he is the one who can perform that function to make sure people don't just outright die. And yeah, so I mean, to some extent, that frees you up because you've accepted this sort of role. It frees you up to just play that role in the group. And maybe another part of it is that in a lot of ways, Ari was the to use the terms that we don't use, the face of the group. In some ways, he was leading the action, and so without him as part of the group at the moment, uh, some of that directing traffic has, well, it's fallen on everyone really, and so you know, there's just more of that to go around. I guess we've had to split that amongst different people, um, both as players and as characters. So
Yeah.
there might be some of that going on as well.
Yeah. Let me see that. And then Mia asks, for me, Philip, I've never seen you be put on the spot as much as when Esri was asking Thora his pointed questions in the past episode. Can you talk about that experience?
Well, let me say, you can confirm or deny this, but I think I'm
Yeah.
excellent at putting you on the spot.
I agree. I would agree with that. That in all of our games, you are very good at catching me off guard, and causing me to improvise, usually to delightful effect. once to the unfortunate drowning of your character in a swamp. But generally, it has been, I would say it has been a good thing. Yeah, I would agree that you are very good at that. So that this conversation was going to happen, I knew and had time to be prepared for, because they decided they were going to have these conversations at the end of a session that we played, and then we picked it up with a week later. And so I had some time to think through, how is Thora going to answer questions about Dane? Like, what's Thora thinking about Dane? But yeah, Esri's two pointed questions at the end, where with his questions about Thora's motives, I didn't have, prepped any thoughts on how she would answer those, because I didn't know those questions specifically would come up. I love it when players do that, because one of two things is either going to happen. Either I know the character really well, and so I'm going to get to evolve everyone's understanding about the character at the table, and that's good. Or I don't know the character well enough to answer those questions, and in making it up, I'm going to find out about the character, and that will be interesting and useful down the road. In this case, I feel like I know Thora pretty well. I don't know if I've used this enough in games. Thora is a type that exists in my RPG space, of a sort of war-weary person. That's a type that exists in my RPG space. So she's someone I know. It's not like Levexi, where it's just a recurring bit that I do. It's just, that's an archetype that I find appealing in literature, and so I, without really thinking about it as such, I have noticed that I tend to have it in most of my RPG world. So that helps that it was directed at Thora. That made it easier to roll with, because it's a type of character that I feel very comfortable playing, and so I had a good feeling of of how to move forward on that. The difficult part, I think the difficult part with conversations with smart characters, with smart player characters, or perhaps more with wise player characters, is trying to give a little to the reality that Esri is an insightful person. And so Esri is going to read Thora better than Hog is going to read Thora. And so it's also tricky, because while Thora is a type, this iteration of that type is also very smart, like very cunning. And so it's my desire, because I'm enjoying the role play, is to just lay it out there and let's learn about Thora and have this cool moment between the characters, but having to remember and remind myself, this is a person with a lot of walls, and this is a person with a lot of barriers, and she isn't going to just pour out her soul to Esri because he asks. It's right. She's, on the one hand, it's trying to lay it out in such a way that what she's saying can be taken and is useful. It's not just her being irritatingly, or just obfuscating,
vague,
or being irritatingly vague or something like that. But also that leaves it clear in the interaction that Thora could have said more if she felt like it. That she has revealed what it suited her to reveal in this situation. And Esri, being very insightful, is good at reading whether she's deceiving, but obviously insight will not necessarily tell you what didn't she say.
Yeah.
So
Well, and he's also not not managing to get through
Mhm.
some of those DCs also. So it's
That
you
is
know, like
also true sometimes.
rolling high, but still not making it is always
Mhm.
interesting.
Yeah. So that's kind of what that was. And I enjoyed the moment too. I'm glad it came across as I'm glad it came across the way it did. That you you read it as being put on the spot because it definitely was, and I like that when it happens. So I'm glad that the moment came across well because I have really enjoyed playing Thora and particularly playing Thora with her interactions with these characters. I think the only person who hasn't had like a moment with Thora it might be Pog.
We
Yeah.
did when we had the canisters. I mean, it wasn't just Pog, I guess,
Right.
but Pog was on the spot with her anyway.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, that's true. So, well, that wraps up our questions for this week. We want to thank everyone who submitted questions. If you'd like to submit questions, you can put them in comments on any of our recent videos. You can also go over to our Discord, which you'll find a link to in the description below. And we've got a couple of channels set aside over there for questions of this kind for this show, as well as for the Eberron Renewed podcast that the Geek Pantheon also does. And we do a similar thing there, just not every week. In the meantime, new episodes of Khyber Shards drop every Monday, new KSA every Friday. And thank you for watching. Until next time, thanks for rolling with us.